what I do every day is pray to God and to Martha that whoever did this crime is brought to justice.
That Michael Skakel, the nephew of Bobby Kennedy's widow Ethel, proclaiming his innocence in the 1975 murder of Martha Moxley, Skakel's 15-year-old neighbor. Skakel was convicted of her murder 11 years ago and today released from prison on bail, and he walked out of court a semi-free man. His conviction overturned on the grounds he did not get a constitutionally adequate defense, despite the millions spent on his behalf. The Moxley family, as you may expect, none too happy.
It's difficult when you think that it's the messenger, not the message, or the evidence that is a technicality that Michael's out on bail.
Now, for analysis of the Skakel case, let's bring in our guest, Bill Aaronwald. He is a criminal defense attorney and a former chief of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York. Bill, thank you very much for a few minutes.
My pleasure.
At the time of the conviction of Skakel, did you think that if he ever was going to get released early, it was because of incompetent counsel?
No, no. Look, Mickey Sherman had a very good reputation. He was considered to be a very good defense lawyer. This was a high-profile case. You know, the interesting thing is that cases are rarely set aside based upon inadequate representation. Yep. I mean, the standard or the bar is somewhat high. It's not just whether or not a lawyer made mistakes. It's whether or not those mistakes rose to a level where, had he not made those mistakes, there was a likelihood that the result would have been different. In this case, the judge who set aside the verdict took about 130 some odd pages pointing out chapter and verse of each instance where he thought that Sherman's representation fell short of the mark. And I cannot recall an instance where I can ever remember any judge going to the lengths that this judge went to in excoriating a defense lawyer's performance.
Leaving aside the specific details and some unique aspects of this case, people may have seen the Times story yesterday where they talked about the millions spent by the Kennedys and the relatives in terms of locating witnesses as far as Europe, getting expert testimony here relating to the trial, raising the specter of how money can really create a difference in the level of justice. Not a newsflash. But then I remember at the time we covered this case, not that I'm defending by any means Michael Skakel, but the question of, if it wasn't the high-profile nature and the high-profile defendant, would he have ever seen the inside of a courtroom 30 years after the original murder took place? Which is more damning, notoriety here or money that can get you a better chance at justice? Which pushes the levers of justice more one way or the other? I know it's a loaded question, but...
Well, I don't think that there's any reasonable basis to assume that if it wasn't Michael Skakel, a high-profile guy with money, that 30 years later this case would not have seen the inside of a courtroom. I mean, there are cases which linger for years and years, and then all of a sudden there's a development, there's some new evidence, whether it's DNA or something else, which comes to the forefront, and as a result that person is in a courtroom.
But you know from being in the DA's office and also working on the prosecutorial side that certain cases get more pressure and get pushed more to see a second chance here inside a courtroom than others.
Well, yeah, but by the same token, the more time that passes, you know, the case sort of becomes a cold case, and you know, the pressure sort of is focused somewhere else. I also think that there's no question about the fact that, you know, someone who has the money and the funds to subsidize a criminal defense, has the money to spend on investigators and all of the other things that go with preparing a defense, certainly have a huge advantage over those who don't have those resources.
Well, I asked some attorneys last night, if a client came to you and said, Bill, here's a blank check, the only thing I care about is that I don't see the inside of a jail, what does limitless funds help, what are they best spent on for a defense? And I know each case is different, but generally, is it getting a team of associates to file papers and drown the other side here in continuances, or is it an investigation? Where does money really matter?
Well, I could tell you this way. I mean, basically, the government, whether it be the federal government or local government, they have unlimited resources, and nobody ever says, gee, there's an imbalance here. Why does the government have all of this much taxpayer money? Why does the government have all these funds and resources to do whatever they want to do in order to make a case? And then you have a defendant on the other side, let's say not the person who has the resources. Right. And even Michael Skakel does not have the unlimited resources that the state has. Those resources are limitless. So, I mean, there is that imbalance. In answer to your question, if a client comes and says, here's a blank check, what that means is that I have no reluctance, I have no inhibitions, I have no inability to utilize whatever resources I think are best suited to that case. If I want to hire a team of investigators, I can do that. And I can hire the best investigators, the most high-priced investigators. There's no end to what I can do. Where a client comes to me with very limited resources, then my ability to basically attract those resources, use those resources, is equally limited. But that doesn't apply to the prosecution. And I think that the public doesn't necessarily understand that.
Well, they don't see guys like you necessarily working as a junior or as an ADA too long. You guys move on into the private ranks for a reason.
Look, I did it for 10 years, okay? And there are people who do it for longer, and there are people who have done it for their career. So, but I understand what you're saying. But I mean, I think you have to understand that to put things in perspective, in a perfect world, a defendant would have the same resources available to him that the prosecution has, but that's just not the real world.
All right. Up next, even though I've got some Met fans on this side of the table, Alex Rodriguez. Now, if you're seeing A-Rod in a hearing room or at a radio station or anywhere except on the ball field, odds are there is controversy. History tells us that much. We're going to unpack the latest after this.